Rupal Bhansali joins us now, and let's connect with Rupal to understand that what is the FI outlook, and in terms of the positioning, which generally by FIs in last couple of months has been negative, will that change? Rupal, good morning. Thank you for joining us. For a India
Here.
investor who's got options to invest in other countries, how would you now view the India story after yesterday's election mandate?
Ironically, I actually think it's a very healthy development. I know the market reacted quite negatively. Obviously, vis-a-vis expectations, it was certainly an upset loss. But I think that giving a reality check, both to oneself in terms of markets are not a one-way bet, but also, to the leadership, that there is more than simply PR, that matters to the Indian population. And people actually voted with their feet and with their vote, of course. I think it actually suggests a very vibrant democracy at play. And actually, it bodes much better for India in the long run, even though I completely understand the concerns in the short run.
We are very curious when we saw your backdrop. Is it a Zoom backdrop or it is actually mist and fog behind you?
It is actually my house, and that backdrop is real, not a Zoom backdrop.
Oh, wow. So you could have heard the reaction of my co-anchors. Wow.
Yeah, we're envious because we're here melting in the summer heat and just waiting for the monsoons to hit this part of the country. But Rupal, given what's transpired, and it's been a lot to digest. First that exuberant reaction to Monday's exit polls, and then we all know what happened yesterday. Would you venture to buy in and deploy fresh cash into India just yet?
Look, India's had a very tough, I think, valuation call for a number of years. So as a value investor, as a contrarian investor, a market that is this much in favor in general, one day's pullback is not going to suddenly make value appear in this market. That said, I do believe overreactions in general are something to guard against. I think this expectation that people had that investing is a one-way street, and that everything that can go right will go right. And there was no sense of, restraint or risk assessment. I think that's been called into question. So I think actually it's a very healthy development. It'll teach investors that they need to think about both sides of a trade, think in terms of probabilities, not in terms of certainties. So again, from all those standpoints, I think it's a good development, but it has not made me sort of, super excited to jump in with both feet. I think we'll have to tread a lot of water, in terms of actual developments, what sort of horse trading is going to occur, what sort of pivot is going to occur on the part of the government in terms of their policies, before one sort of makes a call on whether to jump in or not. But again, I would just say, focusing on the long term, I don't think this has materially derailed the bull case on India from an economy standpoint, from a future prospect standpoint. The stock market was expensive to begin with. It was bound to have the correction that it had, given this upset loss.
Well, is there a worry that perhaps the pace of reforms could potentially slow down, and maybe, a lot of sectors that are very closely linked to these policy reactions and to the capex-related theme could potentially suffer a setback on the back of this?
Look, I mean, the market has reacted exactly along the lines, that your question conveys. I think that's the obvious, but I think what you need to read between the lines is that plurality can actually be a positive for both, not just democracy, but even for markets. The fact that there's going to be some sort of trade-offs that the government is going to have to make, concessions call it, compromises call it, it may not be bad news for either the economy or the markets ultimately. What I mean by that is, one of the biggest challenges in the India bull story is that the growth was very lopsided. It has been extremely focused and driven by government investment in infrastructure. Nothing wrong about it per se, it's long overdue, but when growth is so one-sided and it's not very broadly based, it can create a challenge, like, of course, yesterday's results have suggested, where job creation, the rural sector, people have not felt the improvement, in their pocketbooks and their prospects, and they voted accordingly. What that means is the Modi government, will have to reconsider and revisit how broad-based their growth drivers are. That can actually end up becoming a net positive, for both the economy and the market, as opposed to a net negative. The negative, of course, is if they face, pressures to engage in what I'm going to call pure populist spending, as opposed to making investments for the long term in whatever form or shape or breadth they take. That, of course, will be a negative. But I think one thing that is very clear is even the Congress, has learned its lesson on that front. I think actually both parties recognize that in order to get the votes, in order to please this Indian public, it's not handouts, it's actually job creation. It's actually creating opportunity. And I think that's something we all can agree upon. So net, I'm not particularly concerned that the horse trading is going to turn out to be so material, so negative, so detrimental as it has happened in certain other economies. I think the BJP government, while it is a setback, they still have a very large number of seats. Modi is still the prime minister, and he's not one to give in easily.
Rupal, so at what price point you would say that you would buy Indian stocks irrespective of what is happening in the world? I mean, you would be a buyer and you would say that they've reached levels where it warrants me to chance my arm.
Unfortunately, it's a long way off. And I'm sorry, I know earlier you asked the question, how does India stack up vis-a-vis other emerging markets or even developed markets? I'm a global investor. I think India is a very expensive market, has been for a long time. But I would say the same thing about the US stock market. So India is not alone in that. Unfortunately, valuations act as a gravitational force downwards on future returns. And so the higher the valuation today, the lesser the expectation of future returns tomorrow, even if there is very good earnings growth, which clearly has underpinned optimism in India, and I expect that to continue, but we'll have to digest, that valuation derating. It happened in the US, for example, between 2001 and 2010. We did have a bit of a digestion phase where the US stock markets went sideways and frankly were flat. You can't rule that out in the context of the Indian stock market. Now, that said, as an active stock picker, and India certainly is a market, which thrives on active stock picking, there's a lot of opportunity. It always is. It's a question of doing its homework and finding those, gems. I don't have any specific suggestions for the Indian market in terms of individual companies, but I do think that given the backdrop of this India's economy having substantial headroom to grow, and frankly, for that growth to broaden out, financials generally tend to be a good way to go. That's been the story, for Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and I'm talking about, the heyday of their infrastructure-led growth trajectories for their economies. Financials tended to do well. It's not surprising they've done well in India too, but that might be a way to participate in, no matter where the growth comes from, banks tend to participate in that. So it's sectorally, I would say that's one area that I would be comfortable considering, owning on pullbacks. Infrastructure is going to be challenged in the sense that I think we fired a lot of bullets already in that direction, and maybe it's time to, for a pause. And I would say that anybody who's associated with housing, again, job creation and housing are two areas which both sides seem to agree upon, and that seems to be a safer bet to make.
Okay, Rupal, so great having you on the show. Thanks so much for taking the time out and speaking with us.
Of course. Welcome.